Hi family, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to everyone watching worldwide, whether you're tuning in from South Africa, Nigeria, the US, the UK, Ghana, Jamaica, or anywhere else. Your support means the world to me. In part 1, Adanna's world is shattered when she uncovers Chike's deception, but instead of walking away, she boldly decides to move forward with the wedding on her own terms. With her father's help, Adanna sets the stage for a marriage rooted not in love, but in control, where Chike would ultimately be the one left empty-handed. Please make sure you've watched part 1. The tension in the household grew unbearable. Adanna's mind constantly raced with questions. Should she tell Chike about Bimpi's return? Would he seek her out again? Or was his devotion to Adanna real this time? Unable to ignore her instincts, Adanna took matters into her own hands. She tracked down Bimpi through a mutual acquaintance and set up a discreet meeting. The thought of coming face to face with the woman who had conspired to ruin her life filled her with dread, but Adanna was no longer the naive girl who had once blindly trusted Chike. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more resolute. They met at a quiet cafe in Lekki, away from the public eye. Bimpe arrived, looking as confident as ever. She smiled as if nothing had happened, but Adanna could see through the mask. "Well, well, well," Bimpi said, her voice laced with amusement. "I didn't expect to see you here." Adanna's face remained calm, though her heart pounded in her chest. "Why are you back in Lagos, Bimpe? What do you want?" Bimpi leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. "What makes you think I want anything? I'm just here for business." "Business?" Adanna raised an eyebrow. "The kind of business that involves Chike?" Bimpi chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. "Chike? Oh, darling, you must know by now, he and I had something real. I'm sure he's just playing his role with you, waiting for the right time." Adanna's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. "Things have changed, Bimpi. Chike has changed." "Has he, though?" Bimpi's eyes glittered with malice. "People like Chike don't change. They adapt. If he's playing nice now, it's only because he hasn't found his way out yet." Adanna stared at her, unwilling to let Bimpi's words rattle her. "You don't know him anymore." Bimpi smirked, leaning in close. "Don't be so sure, Adanna. Chike and I, well, let's just say we've shared things that you'll never understand. Be careful, darling. People like him always find their way back to where they truly belong." Adanna left the cafe with her mind spinning. She had gone there to confront Bimpe, but now she was left with more doubts than ever. Was Bimpe right? Was Chike still playing her? Or had he really left his old life behind? That night, Adanna sat quietly in the living room, watching Chike from across the room as he worked on some documents. Her conversation with Bimpe replayed in her head like a broken record, each word dripping with doubt. Chike seemed different. He had been attentive, loving even, over the past few months. But Adanna couldn't shake the fear that everything could still be a facade. Bimpi's words echoed, haunting her thoughts. People like Chike don't change. Unable to keep her fears bottled up any longer, she spoke. "Chike, I ran into someone today." He looked up from his papers, curious. "Who?" "Bimpe." The name hit him like a slap. Chike's face drained of color, and for a moment, the mask of calm slipped from his face. He quickly recovered, but Adanna had already seen the crack in his composure. "She's back in Lagos," Adanna continued, her eyes studying him closely for any sign of deceit. "I met with her today." Chike stood up, his voice strained. "Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? What did she want?" "I don't know," Adanna replied slowly, "but she seemed convinced that you haven't changed. She believes you're just waiting for your chance to leave." Chike's jaw tightened, and he walked over to the window, staring out at the city lights. His voice was low when he finally spoke. I don't care what Bimpy says. I'm not that man anymore, Adanna. I was a fool then, blinded by greed. But I've changed. I swear to you, I have. Have you? Adanna's voice trembled slightly. How can I be sure? After everything that's happened, how do I know you're not just waiting for the next opportunity to betray me? Chike turned to face her, pain flickering in his eyes. I understand why you feel that way, but I promise you it's over. Bimpy was a mistake. My entire plan, it was a mistake. You are the only thing that matters to me now. For a moment, there was silence. Adanna wanted to believe him, but the seeds of doubt had already taken root. Could she ever truly trust him again? Days passed, and the tension between Chike and Adanna continued to grow. Despite Chike's efforts to prove his sincerity, Adanna couldn't shake the feeling that Bimpy was right, that Chike hadn't fully left his old ways behind. Then came the day that changed everything. Chike received an invitation to a high-profile business gala in Abuja, a prestigious event where Lagos's most powerful and wealthy figures would gather. It was the perfect opportunity for him to secure new connections, to position himself as a serious businessman. But there was a catch. Bimpy would be there too. Adanna knew this was a test. If Chike had truly changed, he would handle the situation with integrity. But if there was even a flicker of the old Chike left in him, this gala could be the moment he would show his true colors. The night of the event, Adanna and Chike arrived together, dressed to the nines, their hands linked for the cameras. The gala was grand, with sparkling chandeliers and elegant decor, the air thick with wealth and power. Chike was confident, poised, and seemed to belong in this world. But Adanna's eyes were searching, waiting. Midway through the evening, as Chike was engaged in conversation with a group of businessmen, Adanna saw Bimpy across the room. She was watching Chike, her eyes gleaming with familiarity. Adanna's heart raced as she watched Bimpy saunter over to Chike, her movements deliberate. Adanna stayed back, observing. She didn't want to interfere. Not yet. This was Chike's test. Bimpy leaned in close to Chike, whispering something in his ear. Adanna couldn't hear what she said, but she saw the tension in Chike's body. For a brief moment, he stiffened, then turned his head to look directly at her. Bimpy smiled, her hand brushing his arm in a way that was far too intimate. Adanna's breath caught in her throat. Would he fall back into old habits? Chike took a deep breath, gently removed Bimpy's hand from his arm, and stepped away from her. His face was serious, his voice clear, as he said something that made Bimpy's smile falter. Whatever it was, it sent Bimpy walking away, her expression tight with frustration. Chike looked across the room, his eyes finding Adanna's. He didn't need to say anything. The look on his face said it all. He had chosen her. He was no longer the man who would have entertained Bimpy's advances. He had finally left his past behind. Later that night, back in their hotel suite, Chike and Adanna sat in silence. The events of the evening weighed heavily between them, but this time the tension was different. Chike was the first to speak. I know you've had your doubts, and I understand why. I've given you every reason not to trust me. He paused, his voice soft. But I want you to know I meant what I said. I've changed, Adanna. I love you, and I'm not going anywhere. Adanna looked at him, her heart heavy but hopeful. I saw how you handled Bimpy tonight. That's the man I hoped you'd become. Chike reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. I'm that man now, I promise. For the first time in months, Adanna felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she believed they could truly move forward together. Let's try again, Chike, she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. Let's rebuild. No more lies, no more secrets. I need to know that the man I'm choosing today is the real you. Cheke's heart swelled with emotion. He had longed for this moment, the chance to redeem himself fully in her eyes. He nodded, his voice thick with emotion. You have my word, Adanna. No more lies. The road to forgiveness wasn't a straight line, but that night, the foundation for a new beginning was laid. For the first time, they slept side by side, no longer burdened by the weight of the past, but with cautious hope for the future. Weeks turned into months, and Chike worked tirelessly to show Adanna that he had truly changed. The conversations between them became deeper, more honest. They began to share dreams that didn't revolve around wealth or power, but about building a life that they could both be proud of. Adanna's heart softened as Chike proved day after day that he was no longer the man who had schemed to use her. He had thrown himself into charitable work, using his charm and connections to help raise funds for local causes, and he never once asked her for access to her wealth. Instead, he focused on proving that he could stand on his own 2 feet. One evening, as they were sitting on the balcony overlooking the city, Adanna found herself laughing freely for the first time in a long while. She looked over at Chike, his face relaxed, and for a moment, the ghosts of their past seemed far away. What's so funny? He asked, smiling. Just thinking about how far we've come, she replied. I didn't think we'd ever get back to this. Chike reached over, taking her hand in his. I didn't either, but I'm glad we did. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Adanna spoke again, her voice more serious. Do you ever think about Bimpe? Chike stiffened slightly, but he didn't hide from the question. I won't lie to you, Adanna. Bimpe was a part of my past, but she's not part of my future. I have no feelings for her, no desire to reconnect. What we had was built on lies and manipulation, just like my plan with you was. I don't want to live like that anymore. Adanna nodded, appreciating the honesty. I believe you, Chike, but if she ever comes back into our lives, you need to promise me that you'll be honest with me about everything. No more surprises. Chike squeezed her hand gently. I promise, no more surprises. Life was peaceful for a while, but peace rarely lasts without a test. About a year into their new beginning, an unexpected letter arrived at their doorstep. Adanna was sorting through the mail when she found the thick envelope with no return address. The handwriting was familiar, and her stomach dropped the moment she recognized it. It was from Bimpe. Adanna's hands trembled as she opened the letter, her heart pounding. She quickly scanned the contents, and as she read, her breath caught in her throat. Bimpe's words were filled with venom and jealousy, but there was something more, an underlying threat. The letter was short and to the point. Adanna, I'm back in Lagos, and I thought you should know that Chike and I have unfinished business. You think you've won, but the game isn't over. He'll always be mine, no matter how hard you try. You can't escape the truth forever. He'll come back to me eventually. Watch your back. Bimp. Adanna's hand shook as she read the letter. It was a direct challenge. Bimpe wasn't just back. She was here to stir trouble, and it was clear she wasn't done with Chike. Her mind raced with questions. What did Bimpe mean by unfinished business? Did she really believe Chike would return to her? The fear that Adanna had buried deep inside started to resurface. Was she strong enough to face this battle again? Was Chike? She walked into the living room where Chike sat reading the news, her hands clutching the letter tightly. Her face was pale, her heart pounding in her chest. Chike, she called, her voice steady but sharp. He looked up, concern flashing in his eyes. What is it? She handed him the letter without saying a word. As Chike read, his expression darkened, his jaw tightened, and by the time he finished, there was fire in his eyes. She's back, Adanna said quietly, though the weight of her words hung heavily in the room. Chike stood up, crumpling the letter in his hand. This is absurd. She's trying to cause trouble. Bimpy doesn't matter anymore, Adanna. She's just trying to provoke us, to make us doubt everything we've built. Adanna's voice wavered. But what if she tries to come between us again? What if... Chike interrupted, his tone firm but gentle. Listen to me. I'm not that man anymore. I don't care what Bimpy says or does. She's not a part of my life, and she never will be again. I chose you, Adanna. I will keep choosing you every single day. Tears welled up in Adanna's eyes. She wanted to believe him, and part of her did. But Bimpy had cast a long shadow over their relationship, one that refused to fade completely. What are we going to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chike pulled her into his arms, holding her close. We'll face this together. We won't let her win. Despite Chike's reassurances, Bimpy's presence loomed large. The following weeks were filled with tension as Adanna and Chike tried to carry on with their lives. But there was an unspoken fear that Bimpy would strike again, and she did. A few weeks after the letter, Chike received a phone call late at night. He hesitated before answering, but when he saw the number, his blood ran cold. It was Bimpy. Chike, her voice was smooth, filled with the same old seductive tone. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, Bimpy, Chike said, his voice tense. I've moved on. I don't want anything to do with you. I'm not giving you a choice this time, Bimpy replied sharply. Meet me tomorrow, or I'll make sure Adanna finds out things that will tear you two apart. You have unfinished business with me, Chike, and you know it. Chike's heart raced. He didn't want to meet Bimpy, but the threat was real. He couldn't afford to ignore her, not if it meant protecting Adanna from whatever lies Bimpy had up her sleeve. The next morning, Chike made a decision. He wasn't going to hide this from Adanna. He had promised her no more secrets, and he intended to keep that promise. When they sat down for breakfast, he took a deep breath and told her everything. Bimpy called me last night, Chike said, watching her reaction closely. Adanna's face tightened. What did she want? She wants to meet. She said, if I don't, she'll make sure you find out things that could destroy us. Adanna's heart sank. Are you going to meet her? Chike reached for her hand. I don't want to, but I don't think we have a choice. I'm not going to hide anything from you, Adanna. If I meet her, it's to protect us, to make sure she doesn't come between us. Adanna nodded, her chest tight with anxiety. I want to come with you. Chike hesitated. I don't want you to get dragged into this any more than you already have. I'm already involved, Adanna said firmly. Whatever she has to say, I want to hear it too. Chike agreed, and the next day they drove together to meet Bimpy at a quiet, upscale restaurant. When they arrived, Bimpy was already seated, her expression calm, but her eyes flashed with something darker. She looked at Chike first, then at Adanna. So, you brought your wife along. How sweet. Adanna's gaze remained steady. Get to the point, Bimpy. What do you want? Bimpy smirked, her tone dripping with malice. It's simple. I want what I'm owed. Chike and I had a deal, and I expect him to honor it. There is no deal, Chike said through gritted teeth. That was in the past, and I've moved on. You need to do the same. Bimpy leaned in, her eyes narrowing. You think it's that easy. You think you can just walk away and leave me with nothing. I made sacrifices for you, Chike. I waited for you. And now you expect me to just disappear? Adanna's pulse quickened, but she refused to let Bimpy see her fear. Chike owes you nothing, Bimpy. Whatever you had is over. Bimpy's smile turned cold. You're wrong, Adanna. I know things that could ruin him, ruin both of you. If I don't get what I want, I'll make sure the whole world knows the truth about Chike's little schemes." Chike clenched his fists, but Adanna placed a calming hand on his arm. "What truth, Bimpy? You've got nothing. You're just trying to cause chaos because you can't stand that Chike chose me over you." Bimpy laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "You're naive, Adanna. He may have chosen you now, but the truth has a way of coming out, and when it does, you'll see that men like Chike don't change." Chike finally spoke, his voice steady but full of resolve. "You're wrong, Bimpy. I have changed, and no matter what you try, you won't tear us apart." Bimpy's eyes flashed with anger, but before she could say another word, Adanna stood up, her gaze unwavering. "We're done here." Chike followed her lead, standing tall beside her. "This is over, Bimpy. You won't control us anymore." Bimpy's expression darkened, but she didn't stop them as they walked out of the restaurant. The confrontation hadn't gone as she had planned, and for the first time it seemed that Bimpy's power over them was truly gone. As they drove home, the tension between Chike and Adanna began to dissolve. They had faced Bimpy together, and for the first time, they felt like a united front. The fear that had hung over their relationship for so long was finally beginning to fade. Chike reached over and took Adanna's hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you for standing by me today." Adanna looked at him, her heart full of warmth. "We stand together, Chike. No more shadows." For the first time, they both felt free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, and the ghosts of their past. Bimpy's final attempt to tear them apart had failed, and now they could truly begin their life together. The road ahead wasn't guaranteed to be smooth, but for the first time, Adanna felt like she could trust the man beside her completely. They had faced the worst and come out stronger. As the sun set over Lagos, casting a golden glow across the horizon, Chike and Adanna drove home in silence, their hands entwined. They had chosen each other once again, not out of obligation or convenience, but out of a love that had been tested and strengthened by the storms they had weathered. And as they looked to the future, they knew that whatever challenges might come their way, they would face them together, this time as equals. The end. Thanks for listening.